You are kneeling in the sand, the grains hot against your skin. A burning sensation radiates from your knees. An iron collar, constricting and heavy, chafes against your neck, making it difficult to swallow. A chain tethers you to 11 other women, their presence a shared burden. Their ragged breaths, stifled cries, and murmured prayers in an unfamiliar tongue fill the oppressive silence. Suddenly, a man's shadow falls upon you, a fleeting respite from the sun's relentless glare. Then, rough hands seize your jaw, forcing your mouth open. Fingers press against your teeth, your gums, reaching into the depths of your throat. You gag, but the intrusion continues. He's inspecting you, checking your tongue for disease, scrutinizing your eyes, pulling down your lip as if you were a horse on display at auction. Because that is your reality now. Just 12 days ago, you were the cherished daughter of a village chief in the Sahel. 12 days ago, your mother's voice greeted you each morning, a comforting ritual. But now, she is gone, her life extinguished before your eyes. You were forced to move forward because the men wielding swords made their intentions clear: stop moving and share her fate. They call you Jaria in Arabic, a term that translates to slave girl. But the translation feels sanitized, failing to capture the brutal truth. It disguises the reality that your body is now a commodity and your future hinges on the whims of a potential buyer. Your past has been erased. The man steps back, nodding to another who holds a leather pouch. The transaction is completed with the exchange of coins. You have been sold for the third time this month. The destination they are taking you to is one that historians will later attempt to erase from memory. This is the grim reality of the Arab slave trade, a system that ensnared approximately 14 million Africans over 300 years. This system was disturbingly efficient when it came to eliminating human beings that almost no descendants survived to recount it. The Atlantic slave trade, with its ships, chains, and American plantations, is well documented. It involved the transportation of 12 million Africans across the ocean over 400 years, a history preserved in museums, monuments, movies, and educational curricula. Political figures address it in speeches. However, there existed another slave trade, predating the Atlantic one, persisting for a longer duration, and potentially involving a larger scale. Beginning in the 7th century, concurrent with the rise of Islam and the Arab conquests across North Africa, the Arab slave trade persisted until the 20th century. Saudi Arabia only formally abolished slavery in 1962, and Mauritania in 1981, dates that fall within the living memory of some. There are individuals alive who were born into societies where this trade was still legally sanctioned. Between 650 AD and 1900 AD, estimates suggest that 14 to 17 million Africans were forcibly removed from their homes and transported to the Middle East, North Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. Some historians suggest the numbers may be even higher because records were not consistent, and numerous deaths went unrecorded. It involved a larger number of people over a longer time span, spanning across 3 continents. Yet, there is a notable lack of awareness surrounding this chapter of history. This is because the slave trade was calculated to leave hardly any trace, and in many ways, it was successful. In America, the presence of 45 million people of African descent serves as living evidence of the past. Their presence helps to keep the memory of it alive forever. Also, their ongoing pursuit of proper treatment ensures the story is not forgotten. After 1,300 years of importing millions of Africans into the Middle East, the remnants are minimal. There are small communities in Yemen, dispersed populations in southern Iraq, and a few thousand Afro-Arabs in Morocco, mere fragments where there should be millions. Where did 14 million people disappear to? The answer lies in one of the most disturbing aspects of this history: the systematic castration of men. Hundreds of primary source documents provide evidence to prove this. Arab slave traders castrated African males along the trade routes at rates ranging from 80 to 90%. Egyptian monasteries were known for the procedures. Coptic Christian monks developed techniques that marginally improved survival rates. However, for every man who survived castration, 3 to 5 others died from blood loss, infection, or shock. Some sources suggest even higher mortality rates. To supply 100 living eunuchs to sell at market, a trader would need to start with 400 or 500 men, the rest of whom would likely die screaming. The cruel calculations were based on logic. Castrated slaves could reproduce, raise families, create communities that would possibly grow strong to defend themselves in the future, or have children who might demand their freedom one day. They were simply used for work until they aged and died, then they were replaced with new captives from future raids. This pattern was repeated for 1,300 years. Women served a very different purpose altogether. They were kept fertile intentionally because of what they were capable of producing. The historical records reveal this story through euphemisms, unspoken implications, and details that writers at the time believed were too improper to explicitly state. The trade was fueled by constant need. Arab merchants rarely conducted the raids themselves. Instead, they were business people who supervised elaborate commercial networks that stretched across the continents. They developed economic systems that create the need for Africans to capture and trade other Africans. In exchange, the Africans received firearms, textiles, luxury items, and salt. The Kingdom of Dahomey, located where the country of Benin is today, turned into a leading supplier. The kingdom's finances became reliant on yearly slave raids performed against other people. The Sultanate of Zanzibar had control over trade routes in East Africa, while the Funj Sultanate in Sudan was the leading power on the Nile corridor. Also, different Tuareg groups had control over routes in the Sahara. African kingdoms fought against each other, not for territory, but to gain other people. Captives were moved to collection spots to be traded to Arab merchants. The cycle kept running because more weapons meant more raids performed, which meant more captives taken, that meant more buying power, that resulted in more weapons. The cycle was never-ending. Villages suffered attacks at dawn, when potential resistance was at its lowest. Warriors would surround areas while the people were sleeping. The attacks came suddenly and were crushing. Men who resisted faced quick deaths. Men who would give up immediately faced judgment on the spot, where age, fitness, and level of strength were all recorded immediately. Younger and stronger men were picked for castration to be sold. Older were killed on the spot because they were worth little. Women faced a separate judgment altogether. They were examined under specific criteria. Their ages were of particular value. Younger girls required years of attention prior to being useful. Older women were worth very little. The perfect range was approximately 13 to 25 years of age. Just old enough to make it through the tough journey, the price was affected dramatically by physical appearance. Also, certain markets approved only certain features. Ethiopian women were considered very valuable in trade across almost all markets. And women who met the desirable criteria were separated and given marginally better handling while being moved in transport, not out of empathy however, but to protect investments. The breaking apart of families happened at collection and captured sites. Mothers were broken up from kids while couples and siblings were broken up. The bonds were broken within seconds that provided no hopes of being united once more. Explorers and missionaries wrote down moments of heartbreaking moments as families tried to cling to each other for more seconds of holding on. The final moments happened until the chains were pulled hard and people who loved each other through life were dragged in different directions to never meet or know of each other as happenings once more. A missionary wrote that he constantly had nightmares for years following and could hear the mothers calling for their children years following. And no matter how much time passed or no matter how much he traveled, the cries never left him. Those screams went through Africa for 1,300 years. The Sahara routes were measured in death, not miles. Think about what it would be like to walk chained with almost no water available, underneath the heat that would kill. Collection spots existed in sub-Saharan Africa and went to the markets of North Africa, such as Tripoli, Tunis, Cairo, or Marrakech. Caravans traveled over 7,500 miles. Some took over 2,000 miles. If conditions were ideal, the traveling would take 2 to 3 months. Conditions were never ideal. The Sahara is the biggest, hottest desert on the planet. Temperatures are more than 120 Fahrenheit. Shade doesn't exist for hundreds of miles. Sand gets so extremely hot it will start to severely affect and harm the skin when put on it. Then, the temperature drops. The temperature swings can cause people to die easily. Water was the most valuable thing possible and it was rationed extremely brutally. Camels needed water to survive. Camels were valuable and used to carry valuable materials. Slaves were much more easily replaced. Slaves were supplied whatever remained when the animals were quenched. People's cracked lips would bleed forever. Tongues would swell. There would be lots of burning sand for thousands of miles. Food was very little, dried dates or sometimes meat. This would contain enough calories to move legs only and never to maintain their conditions over long periods. Death rates were extremely elevated. It is approximated that 20 to 30% of slaves died in the Sahara. Caravans also had over 60% losses. Those who fell were left alone. German explorer Heinrich Barth wrote what he witnessed in the 1850s. The skeletons were found everywhere. In some valleys, bones were in such great amounts that stepping on them was unavoidable, ancient or new. Gustav Nachtigall wrote about bones giving the sand a pavement-type texture. Millions may be scattered across to mark the forgotten paths. For those that survived, coming to the north meant temporary death stopped. However, survival involved a very high price. Many were internally broken. Although bodies finished the traveling, spirits did not. The test did not end, but changed altogether. The slave markets were ancient and improved greatly over long periods. The Cairo market worked for thousands of years by the point European observers documented it. Generation after generation improved pricing as well as practices and reviews. Buyers came from all over and beyond. The markets were organized on the basis of category. Workers were separated, domestic servants created the third, and the women meant for private sale existed behind screens. The testing was very systematic. Teeth were first looked at because they can display age as well as conditioning. Skin was looked over for any flaws. Hair was inspected for longness. Very extremely careful and close examinations were made that were extremely personal, that explorers wrote about, that resulted in editors blocking it. Prices varied based on origin as well as intended purposes. Special women were sold for much more. Virgins from favorable backgrounds were sold for several years of pay. The Zanzibar was the biggest market throughout land and ocean with a rate of 50,000 slaves traded per year. The economy depended greatly on the trade. David Livingstone witnessed and wrote about it that helped British abolition efforts. The market lasted up until 1873 until British pressure forced closing the trading. However, ships still sailed secretly at night. Where desires exist, suppliers exist in a particular. Where did these women go? The answers were determined by purpose and buyers. Wealthy buyers constructed harems. Ottoman sultans had many harems that contained hundreds of women, sometimes thousands. Lesser nobles and governors had smaller collections depending on their overall wealth. The harem was more intricate than commonly thought. It was a political organization where people wanted power and to cause issues for other people. Sons born to highly influential people meant everything. This resulted in lots of political navigating and taking place. For captured African women, getting into a harem greatly meant losing themselves completely. Language was not allowed. Religions were replaced. Pasts were lost and training was done to provide new expectations. There was nothing left of what they once were. The women not sold to wealthy people had different events. Some had to cook and clean. Consent did not exist much in Islamic law, only protected pregnant women. Children were easily welcomed. Over time, heritages vanished completely, not just the individual. The Arab did not end greatly by proclamations or wars. However, it faded under extreme push rather than from moral. British sea control closed African routes in the late 1800s and African powers fell. The only legacy today is loss and absence. Hardly any are a part of the 14 million that were taken. The men had been castrated and the women's culture was diluted until the culture faded. Archaeologists found a mass grave of sub-Saharan Africans in 2020 who likely collapsed and were left behind as slaves. No names and nothing for them. The Atlantic trade left 45 million for people to be remembered. The Arab trade now leaves 14 million to be forgotten. We not learn their names. Also, she might have ended up living until the end of her life, while others around never had her memories or cultural knowledge. We now know and can understand what happened. 1,300 years existed feeding the machine to make sure this happened. The Atlantic slave trade has memorials. However, the Arab trade has scattered bones forever. Remember them as normal individual by having a name.